Hey guys, thanks for checking out today's message. We are so glad that you joined us. We consider resources like this one to be supplemental, so if you do not have a church home and you live in the greater Savannah area, we would love to invite you to one of our locations. If you're blessed by today's message and would like to invest into the life and the ministry of City Church, you can do so by visiting our website, citychurch.life, and clicking Give. Our hope is that you'll be blessed and encouraged as we dive into today's message.
We are obviously in the Christmas season, and I hope that you're having a good time spending time with friends and family. Just a couple of really quick things I just want to double emphasize on. One of those is our toy drive for Red. We are trying to get 90 $10 to $15 toys to give out next Saturday. And at best, I'm feeling like I don't see Matthew and Meredith. I don't see anything right now. The haze is still kind of thick, but they're right there. I think we're probably, at about 50 gifts, roughly. Yeah, so we're going to be posting on Facebook all week, but we're giving those out Saturday. We're wrapping them on Friday, the 21st. And so if you're available on Friday beginning at 2 o'clock, is that right? Yeah, 2 o'clock here, we're going to have a wrapping party with lots of beatboxing and paper. But we're going to be wrapping these, and we're giving them out Saturday. So $10 to $15 gift. These are some examples. We have more that are in the back. If you're able to this week, pick those up, bring them in during the week. We'd really appreciate that. Let us know if you're heading this way. But I think we still probably need. We've got a daycare over in Georgetown that has been working with us, and they're actually collecting toys as well. And we're waiting to hear the exact count from them on how many they've been able to get. But my guess is probably we still need 30 or 40 more gifts. So if you can get those in this week, that'd be great. So every child will get a wrapped present and a stocking filled with some really amazing things. So make sure that you're a part of that. And then next Sunday, the 23rd, just want to give you a little bit of instruction. So we really have a fun event planned. We're doing something we've never done before. We're going to have kind of like a hybrid of worship and skit play. So there will be some live action things happening with Garth and Florence will actually be with us. They've cleared their schedules. They're flying in from the North Pole, and they said that they have stolen Santa's bag and they're bringing it with them. We also have the Grinch that's going to be in here, so it's an event for the family. But here are some things. One of the things that I noticed about Savannah when I moved here 9 years ago is Savannah has on time, and then Savannah has Savannah time, and we've just kind of learned to live with that. You know, service starts at 10:30. Most people are going to be here at like 10:45, 11. And that's okay. Like, we can kind of jab and poke fun and whatnot. Next Sunday will be really difficult. I mean, we still want you to come if you're running late, honestly running late. But we really would love for you to try to be here a little bit early and in the room so that we just have things that are happening all over the place, not just right up here on the platform. The lights won't necessarily be dimmed down, and people might not the entire time be looking this direction. They might actually be looking at the door you're walking in next Sunday, so it could just be awkward, unless you're dressed like an elf, and then we can just totally play it off, and you're good to go. But next Sunday, 10:30, if you could get here just a little bit early, that would be really appreciated. Again, I don't want you to be like, oh no, it's 10:35, I guess we just won't go. Don't do that either, okay? And then we're doing a service at 6, which we know is a little bit of a stretch. And here's why we're doing 2 services. We have a sister location in Pooler, and we want to give them an opportunity to be a part of it because the Pooler location is in a little bit of transition right now, so they're not actually doing any special service for Christmas. And so we want to give them an opportunity to be here, but we just don't know how many will make the drive because so many of them live even beyond Pooler and drive to Pooler. How many will make the drive here at 6? So please feel free to be a part of the 6 o'clock. So if you want to bring friends, family, and come to the 6 instead of the 10:30, or if you want to be at both, or ideally if you wanted to serve at one and attend the other, that would be great as well, because we're not asking anybody from Pooler to serve at all in the evening service. But what we don't want to do is have the 6 p.m. service only have like 5 people in it. When we were on MLK, we really had a lot of momentum, and we were running 3 services at one point, and somebody on the team really pushed to do a sunrise service for Easter. And that sunrise service, I think, started at whatever time sunrise is. It was pretty early. I wasn't very coherent. And we showed up for that service, and everybody was a little apprehensive. And we had one person show up. And so the band led worship to one person, and then I preached to one person, which is really hard because, he probably thought the entire time I'm making eye contact, I'm preaching at him. But, maybe God knew what he was doing. I will say I've never seen that guy back. It was probably too heavy a condemnation for him. No, I'm just kidding. He actually only came because I invited him, and he's my insurance guy. So, so we had one here on that Sunday. So it would just be great if you're able to be a part of the 6 o'clock. We're not really worried about the 10:30, but we are thinking about the 6 o'clock. So if you are able to be at the 6, make room for somebody in the 10:30. That would be great. It's going to be a lot of fun. They've been rehearsing, and it's really, really funny. And like I said, something for the entire family. We're not going to have kids' church that day because it's very kids appropriate. But we will have nursery for little ones. Just make sure you're a part of it, and make sure you're a little bit early. Just this one Sunday, if you could, it would really help everybody that's put their time and energy into the event. Next Sunday, the 23rd, and then our offices will be closed the week of Christmas. Pastoral staff is still available, so if you're in need, you need to talk to a pastor, you need to talk to a member of the lead team, we are available, but we're going to give everybody an opportunity to be with their families that week. And then we'll come together just before kicking off a new year. So that's kind of what's going on. Help us with the toys. Help us make Christmas great for some other kids. And then next Sunday, come and be ready to have a really great time. Anybody watched any great Christmas movies yet? Anybody? Some of you are lying because I don't believe you. I know you have. How many of you have watched some really bad Christmas movies yet? Has anybody been on Netflix yet? Like, how do they survive? They've pumped out like 30 Christmas movies this year, and every one of them is makes Hallmark look like Hollywood, right? I mean, it's crazy, the stuff that's on there. I will say that for the most part, it's been very family friendly. We haven't had to turn but a couple of them off. But for the most part, we've been able to watch them. But my kids have not seen some movies. So let me back up. A couple of weeks ago, we did emergency preparedness training, and we offered what we call the Stop the Bleed training. And so many of you came to that, and they talked about how to use proper use of a tourniquet if somebody around you gets hurt and you need to stop the bleed until an ambulance gets there. How do you do that? And so my wife and I, we have 4 kids, and we talk about them often. We made the move away from family for ministry, and ultimately landed here in Savannah. And you guys are our family, and we appreciate that. There's something that is that when you live near mom and dad, sometimes you have built-in babysitters, and then when you don't live near mom and dad or any blood family, you don't always have access to childcare. And so there's just a lot of times our kids go with us, and we just make it a part of it. And so our kids went with us that night to the emergency preparedness, and they were playing video games stuff. They had a good time. And Zoe, my 10-year-old, he did not do the emergency preparedness training. I just want to, go ahead and let you know. But we have this big joke in our house. He's always listening in. And you can always tell when he's listening in because he stops what he's doing. I mean, he could be playing a video game, he could have toys in it, he just freezes and lowers his head. And you can tell he's listening. And then we joke, we're like, where did all these eaves come from? Because somebody's dropping eaves. That's our little Lord of the Rings thing. Some of you get that. So, all right. So let me fast forward to me being out of town last weekend, and I am in Virginia with our oldest, Isaac, and we went to a airsoft event. You can judge me or join me. It's your choice. It was a blast. And Carmen calls me and says, hey, we watched Home Alone. So anybody seen Home Alone before? Right? So the kids had not seen Home Alone, and she said that the burglars were breaking into the house, and Macaulay Culkin's character had rigged I guess, I don't really remember. I know I've seen it 100 times, but there must be a scene where he rigs a BB gun up so that when he opens the door, he gets shot in a precarious location. Enough said. And so he gets shot in the precarious location, and Zoe, my 10-year-old, yells, "Oh no! Somebody get a tourniquet!" And Carmen calls me just in tears laughing because that had just happened. She's trying to explain to him that's not how it works. And then he wants to know why, and she's like, "You can ask Dad when he gets home." And it was just bad all the way around. So I asked Ezra when I got back, I was like, "Did you like Home Alone?" And he was like, "No, it's a terrible movie." And that's my 6-year-old. I was like, "Really? Why didn't you like it?" He goes, "That family is so mean. I don't want anything to do with them." And I was like, "Aw, I love you, buddy. You want to watch Home Alone 2? And he said no. So anyway, so it's Christmas time. Hopefully you're making memories, experiencing things. That was just a really great glimpse into our home and the chaos that takes place. But we really champion the season, and we really spend this time trying to take every opportunity we have to be together as a family and to do things as a family. We understand that through the years, our family is going to grow, and it's going to morph and change, and it won't be like it is today. It'll be better in some regards, and there might be seasons in the future where we have we feel like we have missed opportunities, and so because we've seen that in people that have come before us, we don't want to take any of that for granted, and so we're very conscious of the season, and I share all that to encourage you. Be conscious of the season and the opportunities that are afforded to you today to be with family and to be with friends and to make the most out of it. So we're in a series right now that we're calling The Gift of Wonder, and today's message we're going to be calling The Gift of Light. I want to say a couple things. First of all, I want to say thanks to Jim McClain, who filled in for me last Sunday. I don't know where you're at. There you are over there, man. Thanks. Really appreciate that. Giving me the opportunity to go and do something with my son out of town, as well as I think we actually ended up with 8 of us. Corbin, who was leading today, singing, went with us, and he's like a tactical giant running through the fields with his airsoft rifle. Props to you, Corbin. And so we had a good time. We had a good group of guys went, and it was a blast. Thanks, Jim, for filling in. Today we're going to be diving into the third week, our final look in the gift of wonder before our Christmas presentation. And I want to talk to you today about the gift of light. I have been married for 19 years. Just a couple of weeks ago, on November 27th, we celebrated our 19th anniversary. And it's so weird to kind of be in that place because there are times where I still feel really young and immature. Anybody like that? Anybody like in your life still feel like that you're young and immature, right? I still feel like I'm that kid at times, and maybe not like Ezra's age, but I still feel clumsy inside, like I remember feeling when I was just out of high school. And yet 19 years of marriage and 4 kids and an amazing family. In fact, my wife, Carmen, just this week had surgery, and so she's actually not with us today. She's at home with Donna Kincaid, and they're watching on the stream, so I'm going to take a minute and say I love you, baby. She's doing really good. She got home day before yesterday, and this morning when we were getting ready, she was out in the kitchen area, so she's up and moving and just really feeling a lot better. So I just want to say that I am really blessed. I really count myself as blessed. I have an amazing wife and an amazing family, and I have to remind myself not to take that for granted as I watch people every day take their families for granted and ultimately end up in really precarious situations. And I don't ever want that for myself. I want to always be able to be the hero within my home for my children, for my wife. So we have 19 years of marriage, and Carmen and I, when we got married, we knew that we were going to step into full-time ministry. This was the conversation that had been really in our hearts for years. Even before we were dating, both of us independently knew that we felt called to full-time ministry. And then getting married, we ended up at Central Bible College in Springfield, Missouri, ended up on staff as youth pastors at a small Assemblies of God church there in Springfield, Missouri. Isaac was born, and from there we ended up in Birmingham at her dad's church, which was my home church, and we were on staff there for a little bit. And then we ended up in Florida, and we ended up on staff at a church in Ocala, where Caitlin ended up being born. And then we ended up in Hazelhurst, Georgia, which is just this small town. First time in my life to ever live in a small town, and so I ended up in Hazelhurst, and it was there that Zoe ended up being born, and then we ended up in the process of that really feeling the call to plant a church, and so Savannah was the place that we knew to come. And when we got here, just in the first couple of years of the church, Carmen was pregnant again with Ezra, and so I will tell you that in the whole path, the whole process of getting to this place, our hope, our heartbeat has been to create an environment, first of all, where families want to come. We want to be a part of a church where children are telling their parents, hey, I want to be at church. I want to go on Sunday. And so that's a big thing. That's one of the things that we want to fight for. It's a big part of the vision. And then the other side of that is that we would have services and opportunities for people to come together where you would experience the presence of God, where it would be more than just showing up on Sunday and singing a couple of songs, hearing a feel-good message, and then going home and putting a check mark on a box going, I did this. Our heartbeat has been that you would experience the presence of God, and that through that you would be transformed, that your life would be hopefully encouraged, renewed, and that it would ultimately translate into even the next generation within your homes and within our city. And so how does that work? I think that works through the gospel, and the gospel is presented to us in different with different pictures. One of those is this idea of light. And isn't it amazing what just a little bit of light can do? If you think about it for a moment, like if you're just standing in totally pitch black surroundings, sometimes it's enough to pull out our cell phones and not even be able to get the little flashlight on, just to have the screen on, right? That little bit of light can do a lot to pierce through just darkness. And our eyes paired with that do an amazing job at being able to just, as soon as there's a little bit of light, our eyes can really focus in and take that little bit of light and do a lot with it, right? And the more time that we spend in that little bit of light, our eyes get better and better in tune with our surroundings, right? And when it's total pitch black, our eyes, there's just only so much that we can do. We just can't see. We just need a little bit of light paired with the way that we're created, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, everything begins to be functional. It begins to be able to work. Is it as good as having sunlight outside? No, it's not. But it's totally different than being in the pitch black. There's something about a little bit of light and what it does when it pierces the darkness to our own, just to the deepest parts of who we are, right? And at the same time that we understand this concept of light, doesn't it seem like the world just gets darker and darker? It just seems to be getting darker and darker. I was talking with somebody just a couple of weeks ago about the fact that when I graduated from high school and I got married, I went to Bible college, I almost went into like a bubble. I just was completely disconnected with the outside world. And I remember coming out of that place into ministry, and all of the sudden, like having to work with teenagers. And so, I've got about a 5-year gap there, and I'm hearing teenagers, because I was a youth pastor, I'm hearing teenagers say things that I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, why are you talking like this? Why are you thinking like this? And I'm not talking about like a 30-year span where it's like, oh, things are just very different. I'm just telling you, like in a 5-year period, there was just and I graduated from a public school with hundreds and hundreds of seniors. Like, I didn't even want to go get my diploma because I didn't want to sit there and wait for the hours it took for them to get to my name. My mom and dad made me. It was that whole conversation, like we spent 18 years getting you to this place. You're going to go sit there. And I did not want to be there, but I went and I sat there. So I went to a pretty normal public high school with plenty of vile things around me. You know what I'm saying? And yet 5 years later, I'm sitting here listening to 10th graders say things that I'm like, who talks like that? Like, who thinks like that? And what I feel like I've noticed over the course of 20 years now is just like this constant downward spiral that seems to be taking place in our maybe it's just in our nation, maybe it's around the world, but it just seems like there seems to be more and more darkness to contend with, right? And then inside of the church, we have this problem where people have kind of lost the ability to be bold. All right. Now, I'll be honest with you. Like, this is something that I even wrestle with. I don't know if you wrestle with this or not, but there are times where it's like I feel like I want to stand up and talk about Jesus. I want to stand up and share the gospel. And part of me knows it's the right thing to do, but part of me goes, will they even hear it, or will they immediately just kind of write me off as being just like this like terrible human being trying to shove Jesus down their throat? Like, it's almost like we just feel like awkward about even having a nativity at our house because we don't want people to think that we're like, Christians. But we are, right? I mean, we are Christians, but then it's really difficult in the world we live in to talk about our faith because it's almost like we're embarrassed of our faith. And maybe you're not like that. Maybe you're on a totally different plane and you're just like riding high on the horse with your sword in hand and you don't care what anybody thinks or says. But I think a lot of us do. I think a lot of us feel very disconnected. A lot of us feel like when is the right time to talk about Jesus? Will my boss be upset at me? Will an employee or go and complain? Will a customer have something to say, or will that person be offended? And so all of a sudden, like the darkness seems to be just kind of creeping in around us. And I want to say that the enemy knows that all it takes is one moment of light to birth eternal hope. He's fully aware of that, right? So if we can just be real for a moment, like if you're in the place today and you're just not a believer, you're here today because you're curious or somebody drug you here, like I get that. So this statement might not apply to you, but if you're in here today and you're like, I'm a believer, then part of being a believer in Jesus and seeing that he's risen is also acknowledging that there's an enemy that's at work. Like they go hand in hand. It's the gospel presentation. It's Genesis to Revelation. It's not just all like, candy canes and lollipops all the time. A lot of times, especially at Christmas, but it's not all the time. And there's an enemy at work, and there's a darkness around us. And the enemy is very attuned and aware of the fact that if people get a glimpse of hope, it's very difficult for him to win, for him to have victory in their lives. And so the idea of being able to keep the light from shining becomes really important probably to the enemy. I would say that would be a major part of his game plan, and I think it's evident to anybody who's kind of sitting on the sidelines watching that it has become more and more difficult to be light in the darkness. So light really is a gift of wonder. It really is this thing that when we take possession of it and use it, it becomes a gift given to us that's huge, transformative in many ways. Think about just the way that we approach it in life, right? So when our kids go to bed at night and they close their eyes, they don't want to be in a room that's pitch black, right? They want to be able to have some light. And so I don't know what it's like. Every child's a little bit different. Every home's a little bit different. We've done things from leaving on the closet light to having a night light in the room to different things. And then as people age, sometimes, we become more and more comfortable with that. But the reason that we're comfortable when we're a little bit older with the darkness is because we know where the light is, right? It would be completely different if somebody were to put you into a room and say, hey, it's pitch black, and I'm not going to tell you where the light source is. Good luck, right? there would be a different feeling that would come inside of you, right? So we're comfortable the older we get as long as we're in control, as long as we know how to tap into the light source. And when we're younger and we don't know how to tap into the light source, or we're unsure about our ability to get to the light source, we just want a constant light source. And so children want that constant light. So what do we know about the light? What do we know about light in general? What do we know about darkness? We're introduced to this concept all the way back in Genesis. It's actually the very first concept that the scriptures give to us, and it begins with in the beginning. So in Genesis chapter 1, it says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. Watch this. And darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So in the very beginning of what we hold to be the scriptures, right? In Genesis, right there, we get this picture of the existence of darkness and that it has this total ability to just roam and rule. And then God speaks. And the first thing that God says, right, is, "Let there be light." These are the first words that we are introduced to from our Creator. I just want that to just kind of sink in for just a moment, right? That the very first thing that God says that he wants us to know that he said, it's a little bit confusing there. God says, "Let there be light." Let there be light. It's really important, right? Darkness was the motivation for light. Darkness is ruling, it's roaming, it's moving over the formless part of the earth. It's out there. And in response to this darkness, God, in his solitude and silence to this point, opens his mouth and says, "Let there be light." And there was light. It goes on to talk about how the light separated the darkness, right? It pierced through it and pushed it apart. We ended up with daytime and nighttime. And there's a lot of information that's given to us around how light dictates the dark. John chapter 12, right? So we're here now in the New Testament. And Jesus says, "I have come into the world as light, so that whoever believes in me may not remain in darkness." So what does Jesus say? Jesus says, "I came as light." Why? Because you are in darkness. So God speaks, "Let there be light." Why? Because there was darkness. Jesus comes to be light. Why? Because people were remaining in darkness without him. Darkness was the motivation yet again for light. So we have this physical sense of light coming in for the darkness. And then in the New Testament, we're given a picture of a spiritual sense of light coming in to break up the darkness. So what do we know? Well, we know from these beginnings, these first encounters with darkness and light, that light really must matter to our Creator. He must be an advocate for getting his creation out of darkness. Because of all the things that he could address, all the things that he could say, all the things that he could do, the first that he does is to take control over darkness. And Jesus says, "This is the whole reason that I came. I came so that you could get out of darkness." So this becomes just like a really base reality, is that each of us, without God, without Jesus as Lord, we operate in darkness. Jesus came so that by turning to him, accepting him, we have the capacity now, the ability to step out of that darkness and into the light. And now we move to Christmas. We're right on top of the winter solstice, which is the shortest day or the shortest time of daylight of the year. It's actually a couple of days before Christmas. And so, historically speaking, people had a lot of anxiety and depression around winter. The idea, especially for those that lived in very cold regions, the sun was not out a lot during the day. On top of that, they also had lost the ability typically to be able to farm, as well as a lot of what they would go and hunt for food was either hibernating or dead itself. And so this was just this was in the time following Christ, a very dark time of year, right? And not just for people who call themselves believers. This just was a global event. And so what you began to see was that different religions took time during this winter solstice, not even necessarily always knowing what it was that was taking place or how the earth was functioning. They just knew that this was a time when things just seemed to be at their worst. And so they were pairing these holidays, these celebrations, these activities to try to break the monotony of winter up. And Christians stepped in the midst of that and said, hey, you know what? This is a perfect time to be able to celebrate the birth of Christ, right? And if you think about it, at the point in the year where darkness has its most power over the physical bounds of who we are, we step up and talk about the light. Jesus said, I am the light. And so it's like this like perfect fitting of time because we don't know exactly when Jesus was born. And so it makes sense to come into this season when things just seem to sometimes be at their gloomiest and their darkest and flip it on its head. A season where, from a spiritual perspective, people can really find themselves in a really dark place. And how beautiful it is to see people come together and celebrate. When we look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Gospels, it's really interesting the way that they lay out their gospel presentation and the way that they connect the dots for how Jesus came. Of course, I think it's Matthew and Luke. They start all the way at the beginning from being a baby. In Mark, they begin as an adult. The whole purpose of Matthew, Mark, and Luke really are to address how Jesus came. How Jesus came into the world, how Jesus did his ministry, okay? And then we come to John, and a lot of times you'll hear people talk about, the Gospels plus John. Sometimes people will lump John into the Gospels. There's a lot of things that are repeated in the book of John, but there's just this really wildly different approach to the way that things are presented. And I want to take a minute and look at this with the book of John. He is talking, instead of about the how, he's going to talk about the why, okay? So we look at the how Jesus came, the process, and then we look into John, and he begins with the why. John chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So when we look at Matthew and Luke, we see Jesus being born. When we get into Mark, we see him as an adult. We're introduced to Jesus from right here at that point, right? We have him as a baby. We have him as an adult. John goes all the way back to the beginning of time to say something that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are not saying, and that is that Jesus has always been there, right? That the beginning of the Jesus story is not in a manger, right? That's just the part where where he reveals himself to us in a physical sense. But his story goes all the way back. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. We're going to get here in just a moment. We'll see that the Word was Jesus. So what is John saying? John says that Jesus was there in the beginning, and there was nothing that was made that was not made with Jesus' involvement. And so Jesus has been a part of this story from the beginning. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And so we go back into that Genesis 1 kind of narrative. God speaks, let there be light, right? There's this birthing of light to take and rule over the darkness. John's coming on the scene, and he's telling us about Jesus. He's going to give us a gospel presentation. And where does he begin? He goes all the way back to the beginning, and he says this. He says that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And so we move from this physical darkness to this spiritual darkness. We move from a physical light to a spiritual light. Jesus shows up. Why? To be the light in the darkness that does not creep into our field of view, but that creeps into our hearts. It's the darkness that seems to have a voice when nobody's looking. The darkness that somehow has control when we think that nobody else is around. That darkness that creeps its way into our thoughts and ultimately works to convince us that we can live our lives separated from God. And I just want to point something out to you today. I think it's probably pretty obvious, but as Christians, we tend to exclude ourselves from a lot of truths, and that is that darkness is not just at work in the world outside of these four walls. Darkness is at work in the lives of the people who call themselves sons and daughters of God. Darkness doesn't just give up on you because you make a confession of faith. Darkness doesn't care about your doctrine. Right? It doesn't care about how you interpret Scripture and your eternal position with Christ and what all. Darkness doesn't care about that. Darkness is still at work. A lot of times what happens is, as Christians, and we use this language talking about a lot of topics, but as Christians, we find ourselves in a vacuum, right? And we think that, well, why would darkness mess with me? I'm already a blood-bought, born-again child of God. There's nothing to be gained. Darkness can't have me, right? No, but if darkness can destroy you, embarrass you, ridicule you, mock you, right? Then darkness might be able to have 3 or 4 other people that you would have influence over. You might be right. You might be right in the fact that the enemy might not be able to lay claim to your soul, right? But by taking you as a child of God who proclaims the faith and allowing darkness to just become a leech onto the side of you, it might impact other people and give the darkness victory in other ways and other capacities. This is why it's so important that we take the Scriptures and we look at what Jesus says when he says, I came that you would have light, that you may be separated from darkness, that you would not walk in the darkness, that you could be removed from that we take that and we go, this is serious. This is about me. Yes, I might already be born again. I might already have Jesus in my life, but sin is wrapping itself around me. Darkness is consuming me, and I just don't know that people outside of here know that there is light in me or through me, because I don't allow it to be seen, to be known. Move over to John chapter 8 here. Jesus, it says again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. The light of life. In John chapter 10, verse 10, we use the scripture a lot. It says that in the beginning, not in the beginning. It says that the enemies. I just had a total. The enemy. What's that? Yeah, I know it's still kill and destroy. Why is my brain doing that? Post-nasal drip and no sleep with this week. John chapter 10, verse 10. The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that you could have life and have it to the fullest. How's that happen? Right? Yeah, I know. Give it up for me. So the picture there, right, with life. All right, is life as God intends it to be, okay? So the enemy wants to destroy you. God wants you to have life and have it to the fullest, right? So if God wants you to have life to the fullest, and this idea of life is that he has a position that's intentional, like he has a plan for how you live life. Move that into this scripture here, right? Okay, so in chapter 8, we're just a couple of chapters before where we get to John 10:10, and he says here, but we'll have the light of life. What type of life? The type of life that God intended for you to have. So God created us with a purpose and a plan. Sin entered the picture and the world falls apart. Everything kind of begins to be scattered. Some of that is just the brokenness of the state of humanity, and a lot of it is the enemy at work continuing to bring destruction. But the truth is that God still has a plan and a purpose, not just for some of us, but for all of us. And that light has come into the world so that you and I can walk within that purpose. And the reason that any of us have, or the reason that many of us don't walk in that purpose, is that we have a failure to respond. We hear the message. Some of us will sit there and nod our heads and go, oh, yeah, you're right, Jesus is the light. But too many of us fail to respond. And I don't know what the reason is. Maybe we're just comfortable with our sin and we're just okay with that darkness kind of having a place in us. Maybe we're afraid of what we would look like if we just had to lay it all down, push it all to the side. There was a season for me where so I attended this church growing up, and the church went through a really bad split. And this was right at the time that Carmen's family had kind of come to the church there. And so I'd met Carmen. My mom and dad decided not to attend there anymore. And I was 14 or 15, I don't remember exactly. And the transition over the next couple of years, I just didn't go to church. My mom and dad just didn't. We attended a couple of different ones. We just didn't get really plugged in. And the truth is that during that time, I got very, I guess, complacent, being as young as I was, and just, I always have lived with a lot of conviction, so I don't have like some testimony of like real depravity. I always told on myself if I did something wrong. During this one little season, though, I remember just not being in church and not being really passionate about Jesus and not really passionate about what's right. And we went to, it was a Halloween, and we went to a judgment house. Anybody ever been to a judgment house before? So if you've never been to a judgment house, let me help you out with this. So they bring you in, and they have all the rooms in the building set up to be like different scenes in like a movie, I guess. I don't know. And so the first scene, they went all out. They had a car flipped over. It was an outside scene, and they had, actors who were playing, and they were supposed to have been in a drunk driving accident, and people died. And so then you watch their transition from where they died all the way through judgment, and that's why they call it a judgment house. And so you're watching mom and dad mourn and grieve, and then you go into one room, and they make this room like hot as a firecracker, and it's supposed to be hell, right? And so somebody's name gets called, and they end up in hell, and so it's a great scare tactic churches use. And then the transition goes into another room, and everything like smells good, and it's all white, and they've got like people dressed in white, and they're supposed to be angels, and it's supposed to be a picture of heaven, and which I hope it's not. I'm looking for more than a white diaper, right? And but I remember coming out of that, and they do this whole question, and it rings true, and that is, hey, if for some reason you were to die tonight, would you be, spending eternity in heaven or hell? I talk about this. This is like the common theme of youth ministry growing up, which is not a problem. But I remember I had been out of church for a while, and I remember hearing them say that, and I got sick at my stomach, like terribly sick, because I knew that like I wasn't living right. I knew that I wasn't in a right place. I knew that my life was not a reflection of what it should be, and I ended up leaving that place. I didn't do anything there. I wasn't ready to, but that sickness wouldn't leave my stomach. It was at that point that I told my mom and dad that since I could drive, I wanted to go back to the church that I had been to when I was younger, and we got they allowed me to do that. And that Sunday morning, I drove back to the church, and I made this transition from being in a position where I failed to respond to going, you know what, I know that God is real. I know that God is at work, and I need to change some things about me. And I began the transition of stepping back into the light. I really would encourage you today, if you're in this place and you're thinking about this idea of light and darkness, like, don't be the type of person when you feel the nudging of the Holy Spirit, when you feel God at work in your life, when you feel like something being revealed, don't be the type of person that just goes, okay, later, or yeah, that's for somebody else. Like, always be ready to respond. Look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 one more time. It says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. I heard a pastor just point this out, that when we look at the definition of the word let for this, it says not prevent or forbid, to allow, right? So in order for there to be light inside of you, you have to let it. God will speak the light. God will speak the transition. God will speak the hope. He'll get to work. He'll do the things. He'll move the darkness out, right? But that light is not something that is just going to be forced on you right now. No, you have to be in the position where you let the light so shine in you so that you can receive that. And here we are in this Christmas season where the light of the world, this is what we celebrate, is the gift of light that comes to us in a manger. That each of us could move out of the old covenant into the new covenant, that each of us could experience new hope, new purpose, new life. And what a blessing it is in our lives. I want us to stand to our feet as we close this morning. Freedom in your life comes when you move into this position of letting the light shine, of letting the light move and operate in you. It really is the gift of wonder. I want to encourage you a couple of weeks ago, I talked about just the comparison of Christmas and Easter. And if Easter shows us the price, right, of salvation, Christmas shows us the path to salvation. That salvation for you in your life comes because Jesus really is the light of the world. And as a church, I want us to know what it looks like to be free of the chains of sin and darkness. I want to take a minute and pray for you if you bow your heads. Father, we are so thankful for how intentional you are. Purpose in which you operate, seeing darkness and not being okay with it, speaking light, and then creating us in such a way that we have the capacity to respond to that light, that all it takes is a little bit, just a glimmer, just a flicker of light, and we have the capacity to see, to find the source and get out of the darkness. May we today be set free. May we experience freedom. May the light create hope in those that are wrestling with sin and oppression and depression in their lives, that today the light will shake the very foundations of who we are. Give us the courage to position ourselves to let that light in. Thank you, Jesus. Let's take a moment and worship.